A brand new UE series just dropped, guys. We're doing a bunch of battles between stats, battles between weapon categories, or things like straight swords versus curved swords. But in this instance for today, we are doing faith versus intelligence, which is a pretty useless question because there is no real clear answer, but there are some better in certain situations. So we are going to conjure up a bunch of different categories, then rank them accordingly. One thing, if you are a new player that wants to pick between the both, I'd just recommend picking the one that is more visually pleasing for you. Whatever the one that you think is the coolest, just go with that one. But if you are undecided for whatever reason, then I do hope this video helps. There are timestamps down below, so feel free to skip ahead. And as always, like and subscribe, and do follow my Twitch channel as well. But yeah, that out the way, let's get into it. First category we are starting with is variety. And yeah, this one's just not even close. Faith takes it out by a mile. Faith can cover every single type of element and status effect, whether it be through their weapons or spells, whereas for intelligence, 90% of it is just magic damage. They do have good options for physical, fire, and frost, but that's pretty much as far as it goes. And even for certain playstyles, Faith is just going to be better in almost all cases. So look at things like health regeneration builds, tank type builds, builds for co-op, being able to use a melee weapon for a pure Faith build and not really for an intelligence build. Also just having much better synergy with arcane builds as well. It's just top to bottom, Faith just takes it out. As for Ashes of War, it might not seem that it's important due to whetstones and being able to infuse ashes into different types. However, projectile-based Ashes of War do scale with its inherent stat. So for instance, Sacred Blade damage is going to scale off Faith. So with that being said, here is my top 5 Ashes of War ranked. And yes, it is just my opinion, but I do consider the intelligence ones to just be better in almost every single case. Obviously, I do have Golden Vow pretty high, but when you look at Golden Vow, it's not really a faith-based one because you can use it with any type of build. It doesn't scale with faith. It just gives you a flat damage and defense buff. Obviously, it's going to be a lesser version than the spell itself, but being that it doesn't have a requirement, any single type of build can use it. But yeah, I'll definitely give Ashes of War to intelligence. Okay, time for the spells. Now, on screen, I'm going to put my top 10 offensive spells and my top 5 support spells. I'm not going to talk about these in detail because I have literally just made videos within the last week talking about my top 10 incantations and top 10 sorceries. I'll just link those videos down below. But as you can see, for my offensive spells, I definitely favor intelligence a little bit more, although it's not that far off. But as for support spells, it's definitely blown out of the water. Faith takes it by a long shot. Terra Magica being the only decent support spell that intelligence has. But yeah, in terms of damage buffs, Faith is the best. Weapon buffs, Faith is the best. And it has damage negation buffs, healing spells, which are things that Magic does not even have. So combined all that with a decent amount of offensive spells, I'm probably going to lean more towards Faith, especially because of Golden Vow. Golden Vow literally makes any single build good. So yeah, with all those reasons, I'm going to give spells to Faith. Okay, as for the weapons, once again, not going to really talk about the weapons themselves. I've already made top 10 lists for those. So if you want to hear me talk more about them and my opinions, link down below. But as you can see, this is my top 10. It is pretty even. I have 5 in both Faith and Intelligence. But if I were to give it to one or the other, I'd probably lean more towards Intelligence based on the list that we have here. It's a bit more top heavy. And it probably is the correct answer. I probably end up finding more success with the intelligence-based weapons. They're probably easier to use as well. And especially in this game where not many enemies or bosses are actually resistant to magic. In fact, there are probably more that are actually weak to magic than that are resistant. So yeah, I'll probably end up going with intelligence in this one. Which is best for early game PvE. Now, what I mean by early game is pretty much anything before the Altus Plateau. So Limgrave, Leonia of the Lakes, and Caelid. Now, specifically with Leonia of the Lakes, this area is kind of a bit funny because a lot of the bosses in that area tend to be very resistant to magic, which is going to put intelligence builds at a detriment. Now, yes, it is still early game, so you can use any weapon and upgrade it a few times and you'll probably be perfectly fine. It is still technically an optional area, so you can skip it, although it is very beneficial if you do clear out the area. So with that being said, maybe Faith does have that slight little bonus. However, what we do have to think about is what is actually available to you at early game. So on screen right now, these are all the top 5s and top 10s of what we just went over. And these are the ones that are available at early game. Now looking at the weapons, it is very balanced. You get good options for both. But looking at the spells, it is definitely not close at all. Intelligence definitely takes it out. All of the intelligence options are still there and available, whereas the Faith, some of the best ones are just not there for you. Things like Golden Vow and Flame Gathering Strength aren't available until at the end of the game. So looking at that from that perspective, I definitely think intelligence is probably the best option for early game. As for mid-game, I'm not going to really bother giving a score for this one because it's kind of hard to gauge which one's best for which, especially when like half the areas are completely optional in mid-game. Things like Mount Gelmir and Nokron, you don't have to do them whatsoever. And With early game, your build actually carries you on to mid game either way as well. And in terms of the options, they kind of balance out. You get access to Blasphemous Blade and Golden Veil as a Faith build, so yeah, I don't really know for this one. But as for endgame PvE, I actually do have opinions on this. So we've already established that I like the intelligence, weapons, and Ashes of War, but as for the spells, I leaned more towards the Faith side, so really to decide this, we have to go look at the enemy and boss damage negation / resistances. So most of the endgame bosses tend to have very high resistances to fire and holy, which is literally 90% of what Faith has to offer, especially when it comes to weapons. But whereas when you look at magic, none of the bosses are more resistant to magic. In fact, some of them are actually weak to magic. So technically, by default, magic will probably end up having to win this one. But that's not to say that Faith is bad at all. You can use a bunch of lightning spells and probably get your way through it. But in terms of ease of use, definitely not, especially if you're going to go through the game blind, like what I did with a bunch of holy weapons, and a lot of endgame bosses are very holy resistance, some even as much as 80% holy resist. So yeah, it was definitely not a great experience, so I'd probably lean more towards intelligence when it comes to endgame PvE. Okay, now time to go over PvP. Now there's a bunch of different facets to PvP, dueling, invasions, arenas, so we're gonna try and like categorize them, but still just give the 1 point at the end. So, starting with duels first, here's my top 10. I just made this in about a couple minutes, so if it looks completely wrong, I'm sorry, it is what it is. Anyway, as you can tell, from this list, I feel like there are more faith-based options that are viable, but it's a lot more top-heavy for intelligence, so I think it's just a higher ceiling. It's purely because of Moonveil existing. That's probably why intelligence builds will end up winning this. But going over to invasions, very similar, more viable options for faith, but I feel like top-heavy invasions with intelligence builds tend to be a bit better. Who knows, it could be completely wrong. I could make this list tomorrow and it might be a completely different order. But looking at spells though, yeah, this one is definitely dominated by sorceries and intelligence builds, no matter what. I don't think any of the faith-based spells are that good for PvP. Something can be okay in certain situations, but since they nerfed chain casting, faith-based spells have been left in the dust. Yes, you can have support-based spells and use things like Golden Veil to buff yourself, but in duels, you don't really want to use that anyway. You definitely don't have time to use that in arenas, and definitely probably not even invasions at that case as well. So, taking all that into account, I probably end up putting intelligence as the better one for PvP, but obviously, just like every other category we're going over, it's case-to-case basis. So certain builds might be better than others. It's not really about faith versus intelligence. It's just like a little fun thing that I decided to do. But yeah, that pretty much concludes the video for this one. Hopefully you learned something out of it. It's just a bunch of my own opinions. But yeah, as always, please like and subscribe. Definitely follow my Twitch channel as well. And yeah, see you next one, guys. Bye.